And to kick off tonight, I always sit down and then I think for a minute and I decide what I'm going to talk about. And tonight I was thinking about something I mentioned earlier this week, and that is how video games affect people. How it affects the children, because that's who it's designed to affect primarily, at least initially, to wean them on it and make them grow up with this ability to just kill that target on command. That's what it's all about. It's designed, these were designed, these programs, by the military industrial complex. And they came out really as far back as the 1950s and 60s, and definitely stepped up in the 70s. Before they gave the internet to the public, they had meetings in the main war departments in various European countries, but mainly in the United States, in the Pentagon, to do with how they could keep prolonged warfare going with generations of youngsters who were growing up, who were perhaps disinhibited towards going to war. And they saw that with the problems with Vietnam. Some of the present players that also belong to the New American Century organization are now in power. And the same players back then were involved with think tanks on ways to encourage youngsters to get back into a war-type mode, to breed up generations who would be gung-ho for war and who would be desensitized enough and kept immature enough, basically, that they wouldn't see those enemies as targets, and they also wouldn't think of themselves as being killed. Now, if every young person who went to the military had a guarantee they were going to be killed, I guarantee you'd have nobody in the military, like someone with an extreme death wish. And so they came up with video games as a way for desensitizing the public, because they foresaw this war against movements, big movements that were forming, first scattered movements, independent from each other, to do with rights and civil rights and human rights and so on. They saw this ongoing war against these groups, and if they got their own way, eventually they'd take down this kind of system and bring in a different system. And they slapped everyone with the label of communist. Because in reality, we've been run by an oligarchy for a long, long, long time. An oligarchy, as Carl Quigley said in his book Tragedy and Hope, and the Anglo-American establishment, who've been controlling this for a long time. And I'll be back with more about this after the following messages. I'm Alan Watt, back with Cutting Through the Matrix, and I'm talking about how video games were designed to create generations of people who would eventually become soldiers, because the games were initially used to desensitize recruits in the military long before we heard of computers and so on. And in fact, you can go back into the records of the training manuals of the U.S. Army. There's only one instance. They'd already done it in Europe for centuries, and the U.S. had to copy their methods, but they were using methods long, long ago to desensitize recruits, and so that they'd kill more efficiently, because they found out, even as far back as the Civil War, that in some of the major battlefields, maybe only 17 out of every 100 actually fired their muskets, the ones who were dead, and they'd pick up these muskets on the field and check if they were fired or not. So they were deciding ways that they could actually train people and create a war type of culture, so they could always recruit ongoing if need be with every generation. And this was a stepped up, especially after and during the Vietnam era. It's no news today that they're going into using drugs on the military to create the new type of drug-induced aggressive soldier. They've tried that out. They tried that back in Vietnam with particular drugs. You see the movie called Jacob's Ladder. It's well worth seeing, because the drug they mention in there that they sprayed from helicopters was actually used in Vietnam. It was designed initially to make them very, very aggressive, and they tried it on monkeys first of all before they tried it on soldiers, and the monkeys literally ripped their limbs off each other. And this is the sort of thing the military's into, because they don't care about the average trooper. That's just to get them in as recruits. They just want you to go off and kill people. And if you get killed on the way, you're just a number anyway. There's always another one to come on behind you. So they used video games, initially created for the military, put together by psychologists and professionals and tremendous understanding of the human mind, with histories to back it all up too, of warfare techniques and so on, and what gets imprinted on your brain. And imprinting is very important with games, and with other things too. Ask the advertising industry, sex sells, for instance, and you mix sex with violence, and you certainly have got quite the combination there, because all the primitive aspects in the limbic system come to the surface and manifest themselves. And this is all really well understood in the high sectors of the military in all countries. Now, I had a letter from a woman who's trying to help a youngster who was addicted to these video games. I'm going to read it and keep the names out. And it says, Dear Alan Watt, if anyone knows this, you do. I need any info that shows that violent computer games and films and music produce unbidden flashbacks or visions of violence. Well, the answer to that is, there's a fact, yeah. This is known. The problem is most of the information, although it's out in the higher psychological circles at universities, most of it's kept from the public, general public. They don't talk about this in the general media. It says, as you know too well, the current generation has been reared on violent video games formerly reserved for military and police training to help the trainees overcome their natural aversion to killing. Today's 18-year-olds were introduced in preschool to stalking people with weapons. And that's what it is. They're getting taught to stalk people, to hunt them down with weapons. The full array of books, TV, and music by constant connection to either the internet, the iPod, radio, cell phones is what they are offered when they become teenagers. Along with this are pop psych courses on mental pathology, health courses on pathology, the pathology of the environment. Along with that are do-it-yourself mental health assessments and parties for teens to fill out these questionnaires to see if they are psychotic, obsessive, compulsive, or something else pathological. I'm trying to help an extremely gifted young man who spent many hours playing video games and who had sudden visions of violence out of the blue that concerned him. He never acted on violence and in fact has been known for his compassion and willingness to help others, even doing sacrificial things to help others. He recognized the game playing as an addiction when he was 10 years of age, and gave the games up for a year, almost. He played them sometimes, he said, when his stepbrother, but he decided to go back to the games a year later. He avoided things like Grand Theft Auto and believed he was exercising some prudence, but he virtually admitted this was an addiction. A year and a half ago, he got into heavy metal music and several bands with names like Incubus and Succubus. He began watching Nip Tuck and CSI, and I've talked about these types of programs before, which both dissect bodies while playing almost, and listen to this, and it's true, listen to this, hymnal music, just like hymns in the background if you listen to it. It's almost like a sacred act to dissect these bodies. He began going to films with killing sprees in the movies. He took tests to see if he was sociopathic or psychopathic. I told him sociopaths and psychopaths have no conscience, feel no remorse or shame, have no compassion, have no sense of justice. This boy was said by teachers to have these two abnormally developed degree. It's truly a statement on our times when a child can be said to be abnormal for having these qualities, as of compassion and so on. The traits still exist, although the boy is trying to override them. He recently demonstrated great remorse. For a time, redirected his actions. He's in touch with friends and chat room associates who've been raised on these psychological diagnoses as well as a psychotic culture fare. These contacts reorient him to that disorienting world.